Midnight Metro. I can still taste the stale air and see the flicker of fluorescent lights staining the platform with a sickly glow. It was past midnight, though I can't say exactly when, because the clocks in the station had all stopped ticking. Or maybe I had stopped paying attention to them. Either way, time felt like an afterthought in the stagnant hush of the underground. I found myself alone in the heart of the city's metro system, waiting for a train I wasn't certain would ever arrive. I had boarded the final commuter line earlier that night, hoping to make a late-hour dash home after an exhausting day at work. But somewhere along the line, the loudspeaker crackled with a burst of static and announced that all passengers had to exit at the next station due to unforeseen circumstances. Everyone else, however few of us there were, scurried out as directed, heading above ground for cabs, buses, or any other means of reaching home. I, foolishly confident in the rail system, decided to wait on the deserted platform, believing a rerouted train would surely come. It never dawned on me that the station's emptiness was more than a mere quirk of the night. It felt off, wrong somehow, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. The fluorescent bulbs overhead hummed in discordant intervals. Sometimes they glowed brightly, bleaching every surface in harsh illumination, only to flicker and dim the next moment, plunging the station into intervals of near darkness. In those seconds between light and shadow, I swore I saw movement just beyond the edge of my vision, shifting silhouettes that vanished whenever I turned to look. My footsteps sounded alarmingly loud against the cracked tiles as I paced along the platform. Only when the squeal of a distant train whistle echoed through the tunnels did I stop moving and hold my breath, chest constricted by an unnameable dread. I tried to steady my nerves by focusing on the physical details around me. The rails below exuded a metallic chill that made the small hairs on my arms stand upright. A faint smell of rust and mildew clung to the air, mingling with the faint odor of grease and stale water. The station's signage, bold letters for lines A, B, and C, seemed distant, like ancient symbols in a forgotten crypt. My eyes, adjusting to the low light, caught sight of grime in every crevice of the platform. The station, now empty of the usual throngs, felt like a living organism that had shed its human clutter to show its true form. My gaze traveled down the corridor, where an older passage led to a roped-off platform that had long been out of service. The faded sign read, "Under renovation," but nobody had worked on it for years. Locals sometimes whispered tales of ghostly apparitions and shadow people roaming that sealed platform. But we all dismissed the rumors as folklore, cheap thrill stories traded between bored night shift workers. Now, with the flickering lights and the echoing emptiness, those rumors felt much less like nonsense. The hush that pressed against my ears rang with unspoken warnings. As the moments stretched, I realized I didn't know how long I had been waiting, or even what time it was. My phone had no signal, and each passing minute felt heavier than the last. A wave of cold fear swelled within me, prickling my skin. I had never given much credence to haunted station urban legends. Yet here I was, alone, growing uneasy under the weight of possibilities I once would have laughed off. When the overhead speakers burst to life again with a high-pitched screech, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Attention! Passengers!" The voice was distorted, slow, as if played on a dying cassette tape. There was a pause, and I thought the announcement was over. Then it resumed, lower and somehow closer. "Midnight, on the metro. Mind, the gap." Silence followed. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, and for a brief moment, my thoughts scattered like startled pigeons. A single question flitted across my mind. Who could possibly be making announcements if the station was deserted? I took a step closer to the edge of the platform, peering down the tunnel. The darkness stretched on, broken only by the faint red glow of the emergency exit signs. Something about the silence of that tunnel felt oppressive, like a living presence pushing back at me. A single flicker in the far distance might have been a train's headlight, or perhaps a phantom reflection of my own fear. I strained my ears for the sound of an oncoming train, but there was only the soft hum of dead air. When I turned away, I noticed the first real anomaly. The seats on the platform, metal benches lined up in neat rows, were now facing me, as if expecting my attention. yet I could have sworn they'd been positioned differently when I first arrived. Alarm crept into my chest, but I tried to shrug it off. Maybe I was misremembering. A sudden clang echoed through the station. Short. Sharp. It struck like a hammer on metal. My heart leapt in my throat. I spun around, searching for the source. Then, in the corner of my vision, I caught a glimpse of something on the far platform. Someone. Something. Darted behind a pillar. It was just a flash of motion, gone in an instant. My breath caught. I dashed forward, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. Only the overhead hum and the distant drip of water from an unseen pipe. My voice echoed back to me, lonely and hollow. In that echo, I thought I heard a faint reply, almost a whisper. It didn't form a coherent word. Just a rasp, like a door dragging across concrete. My pulse hammered, and I forced myself to stay calm. I needed a plan. Racing down the deserted corridors in blind terror would solve nothing. Instead, I walked toward the old abandoned platform. The roped-off entrance beckoned with the promise of secrets best left undiscovered. But something urged me forward, as if an invisible hand had reached out and pulled me along. Approaching the barricade, I saw the rope was torn. The sign reading, "Keep Out," lay half submerged in a puddle, the letters faint beneath layers of grime. Beyond the caution tape, the old platform yawned like a mouth in the darkness, its overhead lights long burned out. Perhaps it was my imagination, but I heard movement, shuffling footsteps, somewhere in the gloom. My mind raced with all the hearsay I'd ever heard about this place. Stories of ephemeral shapes wandering those forgotten tunnels. A conductor who went mad in the 1970s, said to roam the tracks at night calling out station names that no longer existed. And, most disconcerting of all, rumors of passengers boarding trains at midnight and never returning. A wave of memories came over me. News stories about vanishings. A friend's cousin who claimed to see a figure with no face in the train's reflection. Old legends about how the city's earliest metro lines were built over a labyrinth of catacombs. The thought set my skin crawling. Was I now inside that labyrinth, waiting further from any safe exit? I ducked under the tattered rope. The stale air felt heavier here, more suffocating. My footsteps echoed loudly, reminding me of just how vulnerable I was. For a short time, I wondered if I should call out again, try to find any other survivors of this bizarre midnight exile. But intuition warned me to keep quiet. Every instinct insisted. This is not a place to draw attention to yourself. I traversed the length of the abandoned platform, each step carefully placed to avoid slipping on the slick tiles. The silence pressed in. Then, another clang. Closer this time. I froze, adrenaline spiking, heart pounding in quick staccato beats. I forced myself to take shallow breaths, quiet enough that no one, or no thing, would hear. My muscles tensed, ready to run at the slightest hint of danger. For a few long seconds, nothing else happened. The clang did not repeat. My lungs released a slow exhale. Then a flicker of movement caught my eye. I saw a figure standing in front of one of the old trains parked at the far end of the platform. Despite the darkness, the person's silhouette was clear enough to distinguish. Tall, with a slightly hunched posture, wearing what looked like a worn conductor's uniform. The brim of a cap shadowed the face, leaving nothing visible but an unsettling absence of features. No eyes, no mouth. Just the shape of a head hidden in permanent darkness. My heart threatened to burst from my chest. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. The figure's presence radiated a cold aura that seemed to freeze the air around it. And then, without a sound, it turned and stepped through the open train doors, disappearing inside. The doors slid shut behind it with a hiss, as if guided by unseen power. Every cell in my body screamed at me to flee, but an inexplicable gravity drew me forward. As I neared the train, I noticed something strange etched into the walls just beside the door. Symbols I couldn't read. Twisted shapes interlocking in a pattern that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. Around these sigils were scratch marks, as if someone, or something, had tried to claw them out of the wall. A metallic stench filled the air, reminiscent of blood that's been left to rust on metal. I leaned closer, my breath fogged in the chill. Then, with a soft hiss, the doors slid open again. A wave of stale, cold air wafted out. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I stepped inside, my pulse thudding in my ears. The carriage was lit by dim emergency bulbs that cast long, contorted shadows across the seats. I could see no sign of the conductor figure. Instead, the seats were occupied by silhouettes. Passengers, dozens of them. Their forms were black outlines, as if backlit by some unseen source. Yet there was no light behind them. Each head turned slowly in my direction. In that instant, I wanted to scream. My throat clenched in terror. I could make out no faces, no features. Just the faint suggestion of eyes reflecting the minimal light, like distant animal glints. My mind struggled to comprehend. Were these actual people? Spirits? Nightmares wearing human form? A sudden jolt. The doors slammed shut behind me. The carriage lurched forward. We were moving, though I hadn't heard an engine start or felt the rails hum. A sound like distant thunder rumbled underfoot. The overhead lights flickered. In those strobing flashes, I caught glimpses of the passengers' faces. Pale, blurred. Expressions warped and vacant, as if they existed in some in-between state. I staggered toward a row of empty seats. My vision swam with panic. The train roared through the dark tunnel at impossible speed. Tunnel lights whipped by in streaks of ghostly phosphorescence. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping I was hallucinating. But there was no waking up from this. Time and space felt warped, twisted by forces beyond logic or reason. An announcement crackled over the intercom, this time sounding strangely normal. Next station, Terminus. Please gather your belongings. The voice was calm, unnervingly casual. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Terminus. A station name that had never existed on any city map. My eyes flew open at the sound of whispering. One of the spectral passengers had turned fully in my direction. I could not see a mouth, yet I heard words in a language I couldn't recognize, swirling inside my head. The smell of decay intensified. It was then I noticed the seats were not made of the usual plastic and metal. They appeared to be covered in some dark, glistening material that pulsed with a life of its own. I watched in horror as faint shapes crawled beneath the surface, rippling the seat cushions. My stomach churned. Time lost meaning in that haunted carriage. The journey felt endless, punctuated by flashes of horrifying clarity. In one moment, I'd see the reflection in the window, the seats filled with normal people, heads bowed in exhaustion as if returning from a long day, their faces half lit by overhead bulbs. In the next, the reflection would twist, revealing skeletal apparitions draped in rotted clothing, sockets empty where eyes should have been. I felt as though I was drifting between two realities. A distant memory surfaced. Local rumors about a midnight train that wandered the city's underbelly, picking up lost souls and ferrying them to an otherworldly realm. People joked about it in bright daylight, but at night, especially nights like this, nobody laughed. Suddenly, the real horror of those tales dawned on me. This was that train, and I was riding it, barreling toward a station that existed outside the scope of anything I knew. I clutched the cold metal pole beside me, knuckles white with dread. My mind whirled through escape scenarios, but logic offered no solution. The windows showed only a swirling darkness, with brief flashes of the same cryptic symbols I'd seen carved on the walls. They appeared on the inside of the tunnel, glowing faintly like warnings from an ancient time. A jolt rattled the carriage. The speed began to drop. My ears popped under sudden pressure. The overhead voice returned, layered with static. Arriving at Terminus, end of the line. The squeal of brakes tore through my eardrums, and the train halted with a lurch. My heart hammered. Every muscle in my body tensed, expecting some nightmare to burst in and drag me away. The doors slid open. Beyond them lay a station that made little sense in the context of the city I knew. Vast pillars carved out of what looked like polished obsidian stretched into a cavernous darkness. Torches, real torches, lined the walls, their flames flickering green. A hush hung over everything, deeper than any silence I had known. I stepped onto the platform as if in a trance. The spectral passengers filed out behind me, gliding like wraiths over the polished floor. No one spoke. At the end of the platform stood an enormous archway, engraved with the same alien glyphs, each symbol shining like molten silver. I realized with a sickening dread that they matched the ones I'd seen near the train doors. They had a power in them, a magnetic pull. I felt my body dragged forward despite every instinct to flee. My mind reeled, memories blurring with the present. I recalled hearing about strange disappearances that happened once or twice a year on the city's metro, always around midnight. People who boarded and never made it home. Officials blamed it on accidents, suicides, even runaways. But standing here, in the heart of something that defied explanation, I understood that some vanishings had a darker cause. The station before me was a threshold to an alternate plane, a gateway, just as the rumors claimed. I stumbled forward, dazed by the scale of it. The wraith-like forms of the other passengers spread out, each gliding toward the archway as if drawn by a silent command. I saw fragments of their faces in the torchlight, eyes clouded with resignation, lips parted in silent dread. They were as trapped as I was, caught in a fate we never chose. Then, a faint voice drifted to my ear. "Stop!" I whipped around. A young woman stood just behind me, hair disheveled, eyes wide with terror. She looked as human as I did, the color in her cheeks a stark contrast to the pale illusions around us. She whispered again, "Don't go through that archway." My heart twisted in relief and fear. I wasn't alone. Cautiously I asked, "Where did you come from?" She swallowed hard. "I've been here. I don't know how long. I got on the train just after midnight a week ago. Or maybe longer." Her voice trembled. "Time doesn't work right down here." I studied her face under the eerie torchlight. She looked exhausted, shadows beneath her eyes. "Is there a way out?" I asked, voice cracking. She drew in a trembling breath. "I think so. At least I've heard rumors. There's another train, one that comes at the stroke of midnight, perhaps only once every few nights, heading back to the city. But the conductor on that train, he isn't human." Her eyes darted around, terrified that mentioning him might summon him. "We can't let him see us. If he does, he'll drag us deeper." A surge of hope and horror warred in my chest. "What do we do?" She motioned for me to follow her. We pressed ourselves against the cold obsidian wall, creeping into the shadows. The other passengers, those half-formed silhouettes, drifted through the archway. As each one passed beneath the swirling glyphs, there was a flicker of light, and they were gone, swallowed by whatever lay beyond that threshold. My stomach clenched. I couldn't even guess what fate awaited them. The woman guided me down a narrow passage behind a row of columns. The air here was somehow colder, each breath stinging my lungs. My footsteps felt muffled, as if the floor absorbed all sound. The darkness seemed alive, shifting just beyond the edges of my vision. We found ourselves at another platform, smaller and more dilapidated, hidden behind grand structures that shouldn't exist beneath a modern city. A single track ran parallel to the one we had arrived on, vanishing into a yawning tunnel. I felt a shiver of déjà vu, recalling the roped-off station I had dared to explore earlier. That station had led me here, through some twisted geography I couldn't map in my mind. Now, in front of me, a battered sign read in chipped paint, "Midnight train only." A wave of dread prickled across my skin. We waited. The seconds dragged. My new companion and I exchanged fearful glances, neither willing to speak. Every so often, I heard faint moans echo through the labyrinth, accompanied by the scuttling of things unseen. My mind conjured images of monstrous creatures patrolling these hidden corridors, but perhaps that was a mercy compared to the silent horrors I had already witnessed. Then came a sound that made my veins run cold, a distant whistle, low and haunting, like a dirge. The woman stiffened. "It's coming," she whispered. Out of the tunnel glided a single train car, old-fashioned and battered, metal rivets glinting in the gloom. It screeched to a stop, wheels protesting in a shriek of metal. The door rattled open. At first, the carriage looked empty, but then I saw him, the conductor. Tall, wiry, wearing a threadbare uniform that reeked of old leather and mold. His eyes, oh God, his eyes. They burned like dying embers, red and hungry. He lifted a lantern, shining it across the platform. "Midnight arrival," he crooned in a voice that reverberated through my bones. "Tickets, please." We both remained hidden in the shadows, hearts pounding. The conductor stepped off the train and turned slowly, scanning the darkness. His gaze swept over our hiding spot. We froze, as though by not moving we could become invisible. His lips curled into the faintest suggestion of a smile, as if he sensed us. Then he let out a soft chuckle and returned to the carriage. The woman tugged at my sleeve, her expression frantic. "It's our only chance," she whispered. "If we don't board now, we might never leave." My mind whirled. The train we wanted to catch was operated by the very figure we feared. But there was no alternative. Summoning every shred of courage, we waited until the conductor's back was turned. Then, with careful, silent steps, we climbed onto the last carriage. The door squealed shut behind us, and we crouched low behind a row of battered seats, out of sight. My heart hammered so loudly, I was sure the conductor would hear it. The train lurched forward, rattling deeper into the tunnel. The overhead bulbs flickered in a sequence, some of them burnt out, leaving stretches of darkness. I clung to the seat, forcing myself to breathe slowly. My companion huddled beside me, shoulders tense. Time stretched. The gloom felt palpable, as though we were riding through a living corridor of nightmares. We expected the journey to lead us back to the city, back to normalcy. And maybe it did, at first. The train's pace shifted, the mechanical clang of wheels resuming a more familiar rhythm. With every clatter on the tracks, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Soon, the swirling darkness outside gave way to concrete walls bearing the city's station logos, albeit smeared and chipped. The torches were replaced by broken fluorescent lights, some flickering madly. I almost wept when I saw a sign that read, "Central Station, next stop." But as the train screeched around a curve, reality twisted again. The sign bled into a smear of letters, flickering from Central Station to Terminus, and back again. The seats around us rippled, surfaces crawling as if inhabited by invisible insects. My panic surged anew. The boundaries of time and space had begun to collapse. We were riding between two worlds, tethered to neither. A door slammed in the carriage ahead. Footsteps approached, slow and methodical. The conductor. His lantern cast dancing shadows through the corridor. Each step made my throat tighten. In that moment, I understood the true horror of the metro. It was a vessel for forces beyond human comprehension. With every rotation of its wheels, it devoured pieces of our reality, warping the city's tunnels into a nightmarish realm. And if we couldn't escape, we would be just another pair of lost souls drifting through the labyrinth forever. The footsteps stopped just beyond our row of seats. I held my breath, ears ringing with fear. A raspy breath from the conductor, so close I could smell the decay on his uniform. For a moment, the lantern's beam fell across my companion's face, and I saw tears staining her cheeks. Then, mercifully, the light moved on. The conductor passed us by. After what felt like eternity, the train shuddered to a halt. The doors hissed open. We risked a glance over the seat. Through the open doors, I recognized the platform. It was the very same station I'd started in, a place that suddenly felt like paradise. I could see the battered vending machines, the map kiosk, and even the ancient ad posters peeling off the walls. We wasted no time. We raced off the train, feet slamming onto the platform's worn tiles. Once out, I spun around. The train car lurched back into motion without so much as a final whistle. In a swirl of darkness, it vanished into the tunnel, leaving us heaving for breath on the silent platform. The overhead lights still buzzed, but they were stable now. no longer caught in that stuttering flicker. I turned to my companion, a quivering sense of relief bursting within me. But she was gone. In her place lay only a faint trail of watery footprints that vanished a few steps away. My chest tightened. Had she truly escaped, or had the metro claimed her at the last second, pulling her into its labyrinthine depths? A deep hush enveloped the station. I stumbled toward the exit, too overwhelmed to think. My mind churned with questions I had no answers to. When I emerged onto the empty city street, the first hints of dawn touched the sky with pale light. The city above ground was so normal. Cars parked along the curb, street lamps glowing, a breeze carrying the smell of damp concrete. And yet, I felt changed, tainted somehow. I never spoke to anyone of what happened. Who would believe me if I did? Late at night, though, I still hear that distant whistle calling from somewhere beneath the city. A chill runs down my spine, and I recall the cryptic symbols, the wavering shadows, the spectral faces on that midnight train. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of a roped-off platform in a station, or see an empty carriage pass by, its windows dark. My stomach clenches in dread, and I turn away. Because deep in the tunnels, the barriers of time and space still bend. The train prowls the endless tracks, looking for passengers who wander too far after midnight. And I can't help but wonder if, one day, it will come for me again. If I'll hear that conductor's voice, or sense that cold presence behind me on the platform. And in the silent hours, when the city sleeps and the old station hums with that dying fluorescent glow, I can almost swear I hear faint whispers, as if the metro itself is calling my name, inviting me back for one more ride into the darkness. I haven't decided if I'll refuse.